Thank you very much for the long introduction. And sorry, probably I wrote it myself, so I should have made it shorter. Yeah. Yeah, so today what I'm going to present here is I'm going to give a global perspective, so not focus so much on the case of Korea, but look at what population projections, oops, this is going too fast, population projections are saying at the moment. So just a recap, why do we need population projections? First of all, it's a good toolbox to think about the implications of present and upcoming trends and the shifts in population size and structure, because these are key for understanding the different changes, the different developments that occur in society. So, as we know, like humans are actors of change, and they are also vulnerable to these changes. And these are important to look into the future, and they are strategic for policy formulation. I always make the distinction when I talk about projections to make sure that people understand what we are talking about. We're not talking about predictions. We don't know. This is not scientific. We don't know what the future is going to be. We also don't talk about forecasts. So national statistical institutes do forecasts. So they look at likely future from the present perspective. What I'm going to talk about is mostly about projections. So like looking at implementing what-if scenarios, different scenarios that show implications of different pathways that the population would take. So this is how the population would look like according to the United Nations, as it was published recently in 2024. So we see that the global population, according to the median trajectory, median scenario, would start declining in the second half of the century. And it would be around 10 billion by 2100. And according to the probabilistic scenarios of the United Nations, so if we look at the 95% over the 80% prediction interval, then we can see that the population would be in between 9 billion and 11 billion. So 1 billion centered around this 10 billion that I mentioned about. The change that we see and what we project for the future somehow follow the demographic transition theory, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with. So this is the theory that explains how societies move from high fertility, high mortality rates in ancient times to a low fertility, low mortality rates in the course of development, in the course of a diffusion of media, of what we call modern ways of living, and also diffusion of education. And there is quite a difference at the stage at which different regions in the world are. So if we look at more developed regions on the left-hand side of this graph, then we can see that already from 2024, where we are now at, we are in a stage of at the very end where we have natural decrease. And this is how this is planned according to the United Nations. Whereas in less developed regions, because birth rates usually fall before death rates, death rates usually fall before birth rate, and we have high population growth. And this is what is happening at the moment in less developed region, where we have still a very high population growth. And the natural decrease basically is only forecasted towards the end of the century. And this is how it looks like at this level of the different regions. As you can see here, in greenish color, you have population change in between 2024 and 2050. And in orange color, you have a change between 2024 and 2100. And what you can see here is that most regions will have very low population growth in the course of a century. It will be a decline, as you mentioned, in Eastern and Southeastern Asia, and most of the population growth will happen in Southern Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, and in Northern Africa and Western Asia. And especially in Sub-Saharan Africa, where like 3/4 of population growth to the end of the century will be on this subcontinent. So what we do in our work at IASA and at the Wittgenstein Center in general is looking at the impact that human capital and education would have on this phenomenon. And what we come up with in the end, our main finding is that these human capital and education are key. So we did some work, and this is not on Korea, but I think it could very much be relevant for South Korea as well, is that we look at the labor force participation in the European Union for different education categories, and especially distinguishing between men and women. And at the level of these 28 countries in Europe, what we see is that labor force participation is very high, but there's still a differential by levels of education, less educated being less likely to be participating in the labor force, and women even more in that case, and with having lower participation level than men. And from what I know in Korea, the situation is similar, with about like 20 percentage point difference in labor force participation between men and women. When we take these values and try to do projections, and looking, for instance, at the labor force dependency ratio, which is the dependency ratio of the one who are not in the labor force to those who are in the labor force to 2060, and this is the right-hand graph. And we try different scenario, a constant scenario where we keep the labor force participation of both men and women in the labor force. These are the blue lines. You see that the dependency ratio increase quite fast. When we do the orange line, an equalization scenario, so imagining that the women reach the labor force participation of men at each education level with an increase in education, then we can see that this dependency ratio decline. And when we apply a Swedish scenario, where in Sweden men and women have one of the highest labor force participation rates in Europe, then we can see, this is the this line at the end, that there is a decline in actually or stabilization and a decline toward the end, toward 2060, in labor force dependency ratio. And this has huge impact on the productivity and other areas. When we look at human capital and education in less developed countries, I mean, these productivity gains also are there, but we especially look in the way of how it would accelerate the demographic transition. So how it would accelerate these regions to have a lower population growth. And this is because education is a key parameter in explaining fertility behavior, especially when there's a high fertility. So we can see here, for instance, this represents fertility, the TFR, the total fertility rate, so the number of children of women, basically. And we can see that at high levels of fertility, the differentials between women with high education and low education is very high. For instance, in Niger, there's a difference of 4 children, so between 8 and 4 women with no education and 4 for women with low education. And the difference diminishes as the fertility decline. but there is still in less developed regions very high differentials. And this is also important for the side of mortality, because the maternal education determines infant and child mortality, as you can see on this graph as well, which is showing in the black square the infant mortality rate, and in the high and lows are representing the difference between the education of women, the mortality of infant, depending on the mother's education level. So what we have also is beyond that education has a role to play in beyond demography, and this role that it plays is very important for vulnerability to climate change, because at societal level, it's important, as we've seen before, but it's also at individual level. With education, there is an enhancement of cognitive skills. It changes risky behavior, extend the planning horizon. You can also, people with more education, learn from past damages, as has been shown, for instance, in Thailand after the tsunami, and so on. And they have a better access to information, and overall, it's important for improvement of health, physical well-being, and higher income levels. So what do we do with this, taking into consideration that education plays a role, is that we do projections that include as a variable levels of education. And we follow 7 scenarios in our projections that follow the shared socioeconomic pathways. I will talk about this in a little while. We have done so far 3 rounds of global population projections. The last one was in 2023. It was published in 2024. The data is available at this website. You can write to me if you have not time to find it. And what we do is the modeling that we follow is that we use a model to project based on the experience of countries, but we also ask experts and meta experts for their opinion about the future of the different components of the projections: fertility, mortality, and migration. And as mentioned, we distinguish between age, sex, and education, and we have 6 levels of education. This is a documentation where you can find all the information. And what we do for projecting is that we follow the shared socioeconomic pathways. So these are our scenarios, and the shared socioeconomic pathways originate from the climate community, and they look at 5 different ways in which the world might evolve in the absence of climate policy. But how different levels of climate change mitigation could then be achieved when the mitigation targets that are about scenarios, scenario emissions are combined with the SSP. So you have this landscape of scenario. Our middle of the road scenario is this SSP2, where basically everything stays the same. We have 2 scenarios that have low socioeconomic challenges for adaptation: SSP1, sustainability, so this is the green road, and the SSP5, which is like taking the highway, basically continuing and using fossil fuel development, so maintaining our high energy consumption ways. And on the other hand, scenarios that are very difficult in terms of adaptation, SSP3 and SSP4. And for these scenarios that were developed in collaboration with the climate community, and that are, I forgot to mention, that are being used by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we developed narratives for the demography and made scenarios about the different components of fertility, mortality, migration, and, as mentioned, education, following some scenarios about how societies would reach the sustainable development goals in terms of education, having everyone in having a secondary education degree, for instance, or contrary, stalling education, like having, in the case of SSP3, for instance, having a constant enrollment rate scenarios. Just to say, like in terms of global population projections, there are 5 main actors, and I would say there are 3 main actors. The United Nations Population Division is the one whose projections are the most used. A newcomer is the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation that published just one round of projections, but that made a big splash in 2022. And the IASA and the Wittgenstein Center, who I'm representing here, and also like the U.S. Census Bureau and Population Reference Bureau somehow do also global population projections, but they are possibly less used and with very few scenario. So this is how the population would look like into the future according to these different scenarios. You have the red one is this IHME. The SSP2, so the recent one is this line, this brownish line. And I have also represented the old SSP2, so like the 2013 and 2018 18 round. And you have the UN, which is up there, and I'm not going to say anything about the others. So one important aspect is that at each revision, which is in 5-year step, basically our population projections has become higher and the peak has become later. So that nowadays we are at a peak that went over 10 billion and at a population which is almost at 10 billion at the end of the century. And this is due to 2 main reasons. One is that we underestimated mortality decline in the global south that happened in these last 10 years with a diminution of the death due to HIV/AIDS, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and with the spread of vaccination, immunization, and services, health services for maternal health and young children health that caused important decline in infant and child mortality in this thing. And the other thing why we are higher is also because we overestimated the fertility decline in the global south, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, and also in some areas of South Asia, like Pakistan. But we can see still that most projections show that the world would peak within the 21st century. It would peak at different times. So IHME has it peaking almost close to 2060, whereas the UN has it peaking in 2080, above 2080. An important part is if we look at the different scenario that I was talking about, we can see how different futures would be in place. So if we take into consideration the 2 scenarios where education is very high, so SSP1 and SSP5, so achieving everywhere the sustainable development goals, more or less, then this is this population. So you will have a population because of the impact of education on fertility, among other things, the population would be way lower. In a scenario where, on the contrary, development is stalled and education is stalled, then we would have a population which would be much, much higher, above 13 million in 2100. So this is how the world population looks like in 2020 by levels of education. So with a still large, quite large base, meaning that there's still population growth going on, but with an increase in levels of educational attainment, particularly among the younger population, the younger cohorts who have in majority an upper secondary or post-secondary education. So this is this blue color. 2100, the population would be 9.9 billion, and the world population would be much more educated if we follow this SSP2 scenario, which is not no investment scenario, which implies quite an increase in education levels for especially for the global south. And this is how the different scenario show the global population in 2100, where depending on the scenario, a shrinking population, SSP1 and SSP5, high population growth and low education levels, but still some improvement due to the past recent improvements in education in 2000 in SSP3 and SSP4. And this is how the population it looks like in 2020, where we have, here is highlighted South Korea, where we can already see the base of the pyramid declining, but very extremely high levels of education in South Korea, which is again saying something about what I said before, about the potential of these education levels for countering some of the issues that are present with a declining population. And this is a population in 2100 in the whole world. So you can see this huge increase that would be in place if we follow the middle scenario, which again, as mentioned, doesn't mean no investment in education, but like quite important investment in education. Another important impact, another important aspect is, and which is a bit a limitation of this exercise, is that doesn't say anything about, it's just about education attainment, so the quantity of education, but it doesn't say much about the education quality. And what we've noticed mainly in the Global South is that at the moment there is an increase in school quantity at the expense of school quality, which can be measured by the increase in the pupil-teacher ratio and also in the decline in skill as measured by different measurements, by different exercise in looking at skills type PISA and also in adult population. So there could be an issue with that. So far, there are very few articles, scientific articles that show that this would have an impact on demography, but we can also think that the a bit stalled fertility decline that happened in the recent years, for instance, sub-Saharan Africa, might be due to in part to the low quality of education that restrains the possibility to use this education in high level jobs. So, and this is about close to my conclusion. We are a bit at the moment, I think, and I think the Daniele will also talk about this, and Emily possibly also. So we are a bit at the end of a time in terms of theory, where the demographic transition is so far the model we are working for, but we have little ideas how this will continue into the future. And we don't know whether there will be a rebound or what could cause this rebound, because it's, I mean, the evidence is very scattered at the moment in post-transition country. Migration might be the major determinant of future population growth at the national level. Of course, at the world level, it doesn't matter. People don't come from another planet, but this is very difficult. And what Anna Rothkirch said is the strange thing with fertility is nobody really knows what's going on, and I think it's true. And my last slide has nothing to do with my presentation at all, but it's a bit an advertisement. My institute is having every summer a Young Scientist summer program where we welcome some 50 PhD students for 3 months. These students are paid and they are integrated into the different programs that we have. And at the moment, the applications are open. It's until January. So if you are any of the listeners are in the second year of a PhD, around the second year of PhD, and would like to join IASA for 3 months, please do not hesitate to apply. You can also contact me. Last year we had 2 students in the PubJust program from South Korea, and I think they had a very good time and they benefited. That's it. Thank you so much.